Hello, little Vickies. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome if you're new. Tonight I'll be sharing some creepy encounters that are allegedly true. I post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday by 5 p.m. Pacific. Please subscribe if you haven't already, if you like what you hear, and hit the like button, and leave a comment if you have a suggestion or just want to say hello. I appreciate you being here so much. Now it's time to relax and get on with the stories. This is my first post, so bear with me, but after reading many other glitch stories, I wanted to share mine here. In early December 2015, my now ex-boyfriend's mother passed away in the home following surgery and other health problems related to her heart. She was born with a rare condition. Unfortunately, she went into cardiac arrest and we were unable to save her, so the event in and of itself was extremely traumatic and unexpected. A couple of nights later, we decided to go see some friends who wanted to offer their condolences to my ex. Everyone loved his mom. We were all sitting in our friend's living room watching TV, and, to be honest, they were really trying to distract us from everything. One friend was just being her goofy self, and I was taking Snapchat videos, and I distinctly remember taking a video of Amy. I saved the video, but when I looked at my screen to watch it, it was not Amy. It was a grainy video with a background that appeared to be outside and 100,000% not in a living room, but on the screen was my ex's mom. She said the words, "I'm okay, baby, I'm okay." And multiple other friends saw it on my phone before it disappeared. She looked young and vibrant and has a huge smile on her face. Someone had tossed my phone to another friend across the couch to see, and the video then disappeared. When we watched the original video back immediately after, my ex's mom was gone. It was Amy in the video again, just like I saw it while recording it in the first place. My ex and his mom had a very close relationship, best friends really, so when we saw her on my screen letting him know she was okay, it was astounding. I saw it first and everyone noticed I was visibly upset. I cannot imagine what went through my ex's mind and heart when he saw that, but to this day it's something we talk about and something he shares with new friends. Something we simply cannot explain other than her coming through in a glitch to let us know that she was okay. When I was 18, I worked at this Italian food market. It was my first job, and I was pretty inexperienced when it came to jobs, dating, and life in general. I was totally clueless and in that reckless stage of life. I worked in prepared foods, which was next to the line cooks for their restaurant. He was 29 at the time, which, looking back, is extremely creepy of an age difference. It was 2012 at the time. But again, I was clueless, and despite other co-workers warning me that he was into kiddie porn, I began to date him. To be fair, it started off normal and innocent. He was a gentle-mannered person and didn't give me any immediate indication of someone with a criminal record. It's funny because nowadays when I date someone, I immediately search their Google history and social media. At the time, he didn't have any social media. He blamed it on his age, which I bought as true. It seemed believable. After a few dates and minor intimacy, I was heading back to college for the fall. My parents found out and nearly filed a restraining order on the guy, and I broke things off on a good note. He still worked as the sous chef at the restaurant. A month or so later, out of curiosity and not having any other options to check in on him, I Googled his full name. Immediately, search results pull the titles, "Man charged with indecent assault exposure, underage women, fake dildo, etc." This sicko was caught driving on college campuses, pulling up to women and pretending to jerk off with a fake dildo. Not even the real thing. Women of all ages at many different all-girls universities and some underage. I dropped my phone when I saw his mugshot. Again, at the time, he didn't give me any indication, but I had a flashback of a time where he got really angry when I tried to enter his car without him knowing. His dildo stash was probably in the seat. I didn't do anything, but someone else found out and anonymously told the market. I got a new job well before then and didn't go back to my old place until I found out he was gone. To this day, it still haunts me. I won't give names, but he looks like Drew Brees, kind of. If you have loving parents, trust them. I should have listened to my parents. 11 years age difference at 18 is a major red flag. And I would like to add, I thought the kiddie porn comment from my coworkers was a joke in reference to our age gap, not that he was actually a pervert. I'm trying to understand what just happened to me and my boyfriend. We were in a large parking lot, parked towards the end away from all the other cars. All of a sudden, a car pulls up and parks 2 spaces to our left. A man gets out, stands for a second, looking confused and disheveled, looks at us, and then walks to his back passenger door and opens it. He pulls out a large sign, at least a few feet long, that has a few bold black numbers on it. He holds the sign at us, stares directly at us for a few seconds, and then looks up to the sky and salutes. He then puts the sign back into the back seat of the car and walks around to the driver door and drives away, disappearing within seconds. My boyfriend and I were so confused and freaked out that it took us a second to understand what just happened. My boyfriend recalls seeing the letter M followed by some numbers, but I only recall seeing 1677, no letters. Most importantly, why did this man park next to us, get out of his car, hold up a sign of numbers or letters for us to read, and then disappear? We feel like we experienced a glitch in the simulation or aliens. It was that weird. Back when I lived at home with my parents, my bedroom used to be in part of an extension on the 4th floor next to the attic. My bedroom was directly above the bathroom at the back of the house. It is usually very quiet at night where my parents live and pitch black. This particular night I was woken up at about 2 a.m. to some unfamiliar sounds. A slight scratching sound coming from outside, followed by small muffled bangs and scrapes. It wasn't a consistent sound. It would go quiet, then start again, but what unnerved me was it felt like it was getting closer. I held my breath to try and listen properly, but my heart was pounding, so it was hard to hear. I climbed out of bed and was just about to look out of the window when I heard a voice say, "Shit," and what sounded like someone trying to get into the bathroom window. I literally bolted down the steps in my bedroom and onto the landing, not sure what to do. I was only 15 at the time. In those split seconds, I just remember not wanting to wake my parents. I was scared my dad would confront the would-be burglar and be attacked, so I grabbed a plank of wood that was propped up against the wall and waited just a few steps outside the bathroom door, holding the wood above my head, ready to wallop it down on whoever the hell was breaking into our home. 5 seconds later, my older brother comes stumbling out of the bathroom, drunk as a skunk, scratches down his arms, bathroom window wide open. I still have the wood held above my head, trying to process what I'm seeing. My brother just looks at me and slurs, "What are you doing?" The silly bugger had been out drinking with his mates and forgotten his keys, so of course he decided it would be a good idea to climb up the drain pipe while wasted and break open the bathroom window on the 3rd floor. It is pretty high up, a big Victorian house. If he had fallen, I dread to think what could have happened. His reasoning was he hadn't wanted to wake anyone up. We also had younger siblings asleep at the time, and this was pre-mobile, so if he rang the house phone, we would all wake up. I was a good sister and didn't tell on my brother, but did tell our mom and dad many years later. We laugh about it now. I started working part-time at a local gas station convenience store over the summer of 2016 to earn some extra money while attending college. When I was hired, I was informed that female employees were never scheduled to work overnight shifts for obvious safety reasons, which I was relieved to hear. I wasn't so much worried about my safety, but I was concerned about getting enough sleep before classes. It wasn't long before I found myself dreading the days I had to work, though, as the job turned out to be much more difficult than I had anticipated. We were always short-staffed, which forced us to constantly multitask between running cash registers, preparing food, keeping eyes on pumps, cleaning, stocking, etc. To make matters worse, the two women who managed the place were awful in every way, and I frequently found myself biting my tongue and talking myself out of quitting. I was especially on edge when they cut our 15-minute break down to 10 minutes, as I never seemed to have enough time to use the restroom and smoke a cigarette fast enough. But it wasn't until several annoying encounters with a regular, I'll call him James, that I finally started to break. James was younger than me, maybe late teens or early 20s, and he thought he owned the place. Perhaps being the grandson of one of the managers gave him a sense of entitlement to fuck with people there. The first time I met James, he approached the counter to purchase some chewing tobacco. As I was ringing him up, I asked to see his ID, and he told me who he was related to, but I politely asked again to see his ID because I was new. Another employee overheard our conversation and assured me he was old enough, so I went ahead and rang him up. Staring at me intently the whole time, he looked down at my name tag and said, "Mindy, that's a pretty name." I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his dip, but he continued talking to me and asking several personal questions. He wanted to know where I lived, what my last name was, whether or not I had a boyfriend, etc. Meanwhile, a long line had formed behind him, and not trying to be rude, I said something like, "Sorry, there's a line behind you," and I casually motioned for the next customer to move up. But James didn't leave. He simply stepped to the side and continued talking to me and watching me as I rang each customer up. It was immediately uncomfortable and unsettling for me, but I did my best to pretend like I wasn't bothered, even when his persistence escalated and another coworker told him to leave me alone. James soon began to make more appearances after that, the second time being with his girlfriend and another male friend by his side. Yes, he had a girlfriend, and I was very confused when he started flirting with me again, this time right in front of her. But oddly enough, she didn't say a word. So I brushed it off and played along, assuming he's just the goof that my coworkers said he was. But when he sat in a booth with his sidekicks at the back of the store, I could still feel his eyes burning a hole right through me. Over time, I grew more suspicious of James, as I would witness him do and say countless things to hurt others. I knew that he was annoying, and I had to learn to brush it off as an all-in-good-fun type of humor like everyone else did. But when I caught him making fun of another coworker to her face, all I could feel was anger toward him. I removed her from the situation by taking her place at the register, as I could tell she was very hurt and embarrassed by his comments, and by doing so it was apparent to James that I didn't approve. He would continue to cruelly harass this poor girl and even some of the customers who came in, but trying to make him stop was like scolding a child. I didn't lash out at him, though. I just began to ignore him. James then started playing these head games with me while I was working. He would take soda and candy, walk outside without paying for it, and then come back in the store and say that I forgot to ring it up loud enough for everyone to hear. One night, he even filled up his gas tank and took off without paying for it, before returning to say he forgot to pay. He knew he'd always get away with it because Granny was the manager. By this point, it wouldn't have surprised me if he really was stealing gas and food from the store. There was something very dark and strange lurking behind his goofball facade, and I avoided him like the plague, though it was nearly impossible to do at times. Then one day, while I was working alone with another coworker, we were very busy with tasks as usual when, lo and behold, James walked in by himself. I muttered under my breath, "Pain in the ass," and I walked straight back into the freezer to finish what I was working on earlier. And then he followed me inside the freezer. I didn't know he was there until he walked right up behind me and asked why I didn't greet him anymore. Startled, I jumped and quickly turned around, grabbing my chest and asking him what the hell he was doing back there. He laughed as I told him I was busy and reminded him that only employees could be in this area. He ignored everything I said and instead proceeded to ask me personal questions, just like he did the first day I met him. "You never told me where you live," he said. "I'm curious about you. I just want to know. Tell me where you live." He was moving closer and closer toward me, literally backing me into the corner of the freezer. "Are you afraid of me, Mindy?" he asked. I tried to push past him, telling him to move, but he kept stepping in front of me to block my way out. "Not until you answer me," he said. I started calling out for my coworker, who showed up and gave him hell for being in the freezer. I was finally able to push past James, and I made my way to the front counter where I looked at the clock and saw that it was time for me to go home. I gathered my things and punched out as quickly as I could, but James followed me out to the parking lot. I swiftly got into my car, but James had managed to grab the top of my door before I was able to shut it. "Come on, just let me see your ID," he persisted. I repeatedly told him no before I found myself practically begging for him to let go of my door so I could go home. Then he grinned at me and said, "Don't make me follow you, Mindy." Chills ran down my spine, knowing how bold of a person he was and considering the fact that he literally just cornered me in the freezer only minutes ago. I highly expected him to follow through. Threatened by visions of what my drive home might soon look like, I became angry. I looked at him dead on before shouting, "Let go of my fucking door and stay the fuck away from me." I then grabbed the door handle and ripped the door shut as hard as I could. He tried yanking on the door handle from the outside to open it, but luckily I locked the doors in time. He then continued to knock on my window, asking to see my ID, but I started my car and backed away from him. I turned the wheels and hightailed it out of there while he just stood and watched me speed off. I was never so glad to finally get away from him, but I was paranoid the whole way home, thinking that he could possibly catch up to me on the road, even though I never saw his vehicle behind me. I would end up quitting the job after this, and I didn't care that my hiring manager was pissed about it. I had enough of everything, and dealing with James was the last straw. I didn't bother explaining anything to my manager because it was apparent to me that James was probably never held accountable for anything he ever did wrong in his life, and he likely never would be. I never saw him again after that, and I hope I never do either. James was a jerk, a clown, a joker, but he was also borderline psychotic. I've been through some scary experiences, but this was the worst thing I feel that I've ever gone through in my life. I used to be very naive, innocent kind of person. I was the type of optimist who believed there was a touch of goodness in every heart, a dangerous mindset to be in. I realize now that seeing the world through my rose-colored glasses put a big, flashing red target on my back. Often when you think of scary stories involving creepy behavior and psychological abuse, you think of an occurrence from a stranger. In my case, it came from my mother-in-law. My husband's mother initially adored me, not for any reason other than thinking that I could be easily controlled. I was meek with a passive personality, so it made sense that I would come across like someone who could be easily influenced. Looking back on it, I cringe at how creepy the situation really was. For the sake of this story, I'll call my mother-in-law by the name of Mrs. Psycho. At the beginning of my relationship with my husband, Mrs. Psycho and I were getting along great, or so I thought. She'd take me shopping, give compliments about my hair and girly stuff like that. As the relationship with my partner grew more serious, she'd rant and rave to everyone in our neighborhood about how much she adored me and how I was like the daughter she never had, so naturally I thought things were progressing positively. But certain things were just really off about Mrs. Psycho. I noticed little tidbits of her behavior at parties and neighborhood social gatherings. She'd sulk in a corner, and I'd chalk it up to as her being socially awkward or anxious, but looking back at it now, I noticed that she was always whimpering about something negative going on in her life, how she fell off her bike and hurt her elbow while riding through a construction zone, how one neighbor complained about her parking in front of his house, losing her job because she didn't get along with a coworker. The list went on and on. In every story, she portrayed herself as a victim of some unusual circumstance. One huge red flag that my mind didn't understand at the time was the story she was always telling about her other son, my partner's brother. She'd say some really disturbing things about how he'd held her, my partner, and his dad hostage in their own home, and how he'd physically punched their father in the face. The way she described the story made it sound like my partner's brother was a bully to the whole family, and my partner didn't seem to think it was quite as severe as she made it sound. Regardless, in all her wild stories and accusations about him, she always scolded her son in ways that I just can't imagine ever scolding my own child. What my husband and I didn't fully interpret at the time was the underlying problem, which wasn't necessarily his brother, but the woman who had been a driving force for the insanity behind the behavior. Psychological abuse can trigger emotional responses in very unpredictable and disturbing ways. Mrs. Psycho's behavior became evidently creepy after our engagement. She showed signs of unhealthy enmeshment. First, she was angry that we didn't tell her immediately when we'd gotten engaged. Then she was angry when we changed the wedding date without first asking for her permission. She expressed a desire for my future husband and I to live in the upstairs of her house and pay her rent. We told her that we can afford our own home and we want to start a family, so that wouldn't work out. The fury in her eyes was frightening. She would look normal one moment, then if you told her something she didn't want to hear, her eyes would turn black. The memory of her eyes still sends me a frightening chill down my spine. From there, she became increasingly controlling. Mrs. Psycho and her husband, Mr. Psycho, would start showing up to our house every other day or so. I started counting how long they could go without having to see us, and that number came to a mere 3 days. There was no privacy, and I felt that I had to close the curtains over our windows every night. I just had that uneasy feeling, you know. I locked the bedroom door as routine before bed, just to be on the extra safe side. Despite our relationship being pleasant in the beginning, I noticed that I was now feeling like I was treading on eggshells around Mrs. Psycho, or rather, landmines. It seemed like anything I said was offensive to her, no matter how innocent. I realized I couldn't talk to her like I used to be able to when me and her son were just dating. I remembered when we'd be able to have nice, in-depth conversations, and I had allowed myself to be vulnerable with her. I confided in her about how I had a lot of social anxiety and that her son came into my life during a time that I was suffering from crippling depression. I talked about how he'd brought a ray of sunshine into my life, thinking that speaking kindly about her son would please her, but she just had this unfeeling, glazed look across her face. Hoping to mend my relationship with her, I decided to help her out one day with organizing her antiques. She had this hobby of going to auctions and buying and selling knickknacks, buttons, and stuff like that. She would get very proud of her collections of things that I sort of thought were junk, but to be polite, I told her I saw beauty in these things, hoping to get back on her good side. There were some creepy dolls in the mix, including this horrifying-looking vampire doll with piercing red eyes. She said she'd had that doll for years and used to scare her sons with it when they were little kids. She laughed at the memory, and the sound had an eerie, satanical vibe to it. As if this wasn't enough to freak me out, she then told me this story about how a female coworker complained about her to the HR department at her company. To seek revenge on this woman, Mrs. Psycho wrote a letter that was meant for the coworker's husband, telling him that she was cheating on him. To remain as anonymous as possible, she told me how she slipped on a pair of black gloves and drove the letter to a faraway location so that her address couldn't be traced. I remember feeling very uneasy about her story, wondering how she could get angry enough to drive hours away just to cause emotional harm to another human being. There came a point after hearing this story when I didn't want to be left alone with my partner's mom anymore. My partner tried to talk to his parents about how I was feeling like I was on eggshells around them, but they flipped the narrative to say that they were the ones feeling on eggshells around me. During this time, I painstakingly realized that psychological torture exists in the form of extreme invalidation. Not having your feelings acknowledged can really drive a person crazy. It was then when I felt a little more clued in to what may have happened to Mrs. Psycho's other son. I can't be sure because I never met the guy, but I think he was driven mad by his mother's severe emotional neglect. Now she was pulling the same tricks on me and my partner, gaslighting us into believing that we were just too sensitive. When my husband and I started figuring out that something was off, things got even creepier. His parents started showing up to our house to corner us into submission. What I mean is, they'd tell us stories to make them seem like victims so that we would give in to the demands of what they wanted at the time. If we denied their requests, they'd use psychological manipulation by telling us that we were uncaring or ungrateful. One demonstration of this manipulation was when I became pregnant. I explained that the smell of pizza made me extremely sick, but this was ignored. When Mrs. Psycho insisted that we go to a pizza restaurant for her birthday, I was confused with why I felt like I couldn't say no. My husband was in the same predicament. Somehow, I think we sensed that something bad would happen to us if we declined. This is also because Mrs. Psycho's husband and her sister had contacted us, telling us explicitly that we weren't allowed to say no to her dinner invitations anymore. They explained it like, saying no hurts her feelings, but there was something else there that I can't quite explain, something hidden beneath the surface that sounded really threatening. I had no idea why, but I just did not feel safe. Then, only 2 weeks after giving birth to our daughter, I had the creepiest interaction of my life. Mrs. Psycho caught me alone while I was on my front porch. The weather was really nice, so I was rocking with my baby in one of our outdoor chairs. She came up to the doorstep and assumed a seat in a chair next to me. Then, in a quiet, ominous voice, she said to me, "You have to share her, you know." Her black eyes flicked to the infant in my arms. I know what you might be thinking, but this wasn't said in a cute, excited, new grandma kind of way. Her voice sounded cold and possessive with certain passive-aggressive intent behind the statement. I naturally clutched my arms around my daughter tighter, feeling protective instincts take over me. Mrs. Psycho had expressed to me before that she'd always wanted to have a daughter but was only ever able to have sons. Maybe I was being influenced by the postpartum hormones or just overall feeling paranoid, but a disturbing thought occurred to me that she might want to get rid of me somehow to have my daughter all to herself. I later told my husband about the bizarre interaction with his mom and how I couldn't keep up with the heavy psychological demands of his parents anymore. It was all taking a strange, emotional toll on me, as well as a strain on our marriage, and I still couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Nevertheless, they were causing us a lot of stress, which was impacted on me all the more while I was trying to adapt to my role as a new mother. They even restricted me in bizarre ways, telling me I was not allowed to refer to our daughter as my baby. I had previously posted on Facebook about how excited and happy I was to be a new mom. I posted a side-by-side picture of me with my daughter with the caption, She has my eyes, which was meant to be light-hearted and innocent. My mother-in-law commented on the post with, "My son had something to do with it, too," which not only put a damper on the mood, but also felt creepy. Like, why did she have to mention something we already know? It was almost as if my happiness made her more enraged. I really felt like I was starting to go crazy. The stress was enough to make me physically sick. At first, my husband hesitated when I told him about my concerns, stating the usual spiel that was natural for him to say, that they were his parents and he couldn't just drop contact with them. But something in his voice contained fear, and it wouldn't take long before he would realize how fucked up the situation actually was. The incident that drove him to the point of cutting off his parents happened when they cornered us in our living room, demanding that we watch their unruly dog while they went on vacation for 5 days. My husband almost caved, but stayed firm when he told them, "No, we can't. We have a 2-month-old baby to look after." The murderous glare his mom then flashed at me was intense and enough to make me crawl out of my skin. You know that look someone gives before they are about to attack? It looked like something like that from the movies, very primal and hateful. I thought for sure that she was about to lunge at me and wring her hands around my neck, causing me death by strangulation. I was terrified. Mr. and Mrs. Psycho eventually left our house, but they were clearly angry that we weren't able to convince us to conform to their will. My husband and I had a dark, suspicious feeling that something bad was about to happen. First, we received lengthy emails from Mrs. Psycho, mostly insulting me. She said she thought that I was brainwashing her son, and she went on to portray herself as a victim. She used the knowledge of my anxiety disorder to make an argument that I was mentally unstable and dangerous. She threatened to post about me on Facebook and make our life a living hell if we didn't apologize for deviating from what she wanted. At the same time, she told me that I was dead to her and listed all the mistakes I've ever made in the past, as well as criticizing my faults. I'd be lying if I said this didn't sting. My husband and I needed space to recover from the emotional wounds that she had inflicted on us. We remained silent, not wanting to engage with her any further. My husband and I were pretty scared, as well as being hurt, spending most of our days cooped up in our bedroom, not knowing what to expect. But we stayed strong through the process of separating from the toxic relationship. Mrs. Psycho proceeded to make good on her threat, posting about me publicly on Facebook. She said I was batshit crazy. She even went a step further, saying that I had borderline personality disorder in all capital letters. This came out of completely nowhere. She knew I had anxiety, but I'd never mentioned anything to her about being borderline, because I wasn't diagnosed with that at all. It didn't end there, though. She also posted a dramatic story of how we had banned her from seeing her grandchild. An active smear campaign against me ensued as Mr. and Mrs. Psycho actually went door to door to everyone's house in my community, posing as good citizens to warn everyone about their extremely dangerous, manipulative, 5-foot-tall daughter-in-law. My neighbors didn't react the way that was expected, though. They were more wary of her than me. Instead of ruining my reputation, which was the desired effect, most people in my neighborhood were majorly creeped out by Mrs. Psycho's efforts. They were equally creeped out by Mr. Psycho's willingness to go along with the whole thing. I guess after years of being beaten down with his wife's abuse, he was just an empty shell of a man, a flying monkey to the proverbial wicked witch. There are a few doctors and therapists in my neighborhood who couldn't officially diagnose her since she wasn't their patient, but they said off the record that they believed Mrs. Psycho may have been projecting, meaning that she was, in essence, confessing that she is potentially dangerous and volatile while pinning it on me. This, along with some stories of Mrs. Psycho's interactions with other people in our neighborhood, confirmed that something was disturbingly off with this lady. This information made the situation all the more unsettling when Mr. and Mrs. Psycho showed up to our house for what we suspected would be a confrontation. My husband and I were watching Survivor in the living room with our baby when the doorbell rang. He crept to the front window to peer behind the curtain to see who it was. I could see fear on his face. "It's my parents," he said, and my blood ran cold. I immediately ran with the baby upstairs, pausing only to tell him that it was his choice whether to answer the door or not, since they're his parents, but that me and the baby would be hidden away. As I made my way up the stairs, my husband hovered by the front door, conflicted. He didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, I could hear jostling at the front door like his parents were trying to force their way inside our house with a spare key. I thank God to this day that we had just changed the locks a few days before so they couldn't get in. I proceeded to run upstairs and close the bedroom door behind me, locking me and the baby inside. I held my daughter close, my heart thudding wildly against my chest. When there was a knock on the bedroom door, I reacted with a jolt. It scared me shitless. My husband's voice on the other side calmed me down, though. He told me he didn't answer the door. He was trembling when I unlocked the door to let him in. His face was pale. He showed me a text message from his dad saying, "Anyone home?" followed by another text from his mother later saying, "You're a coward hiding behind your keyboard." I don't know what would have happened if my husband had chosen to answer the door, but I shudder to think about it. My husband and I both blocked them after that. Phone numbers, social media accounts, everything. They moved away to another state, thank God. We've since been in no contact with his parents for almost 2 years now, and our daughter is growing in a lovely environment, free of toxicity. Sadly, we have had to block some of my husband's other family because they kept telling us we should talk to my in-laws, which, by the way, feels a lot like being told, "Please contact your abuser." For this reason, I sometimes feel like it would have been almost better to be physically abused than mentally abused, because then there would be some form of visible evidence of the harm that they had inflicted. In the meantime, they have so far made no attempts to contact us with an apology or anything. Instead, they once reached out with a nasty, "Have a shitty anniversary, you two are a match made in hell," which only further secured our decision to cut contact with them. I have since armed myself with knowledge so that I will be less naive about creepy behavior in the future. I've studied up on narcissism and the negative psychological impact that some people can have on others through gaslighting and invalidation. I hope everyone listening out there may be aware that not all abuse is physical. Hello again, little Vickies. Thanks for listening. Remember, if you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description. Please subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and leave a comment if you'd like. I appreciate you being here more than I can possibly say. And until next time, be good.